Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the Emmy award-winning anchor of KSNV News in Las Vegas, Reed Cowan.
Good afternoon, and thank you for having me here. Las Vegas and 1 October. Just hearing those words caused the room to go a little more silent, a little more reverent, a little more still. We all know why. Your brothers and sisters were involved in saving lives, in coordinating and becoming heroes. 1 October was indeed a shared experience in our world. It was a shared experience because we saw some of the worst that society can produce, and we saw the absolute best that society can produce. A shared experience, moments that were strung together, that rose up and told us the very best about ourselves. Truths. People are good, and we know this. People become heroes in a split second. And also truths. People at times, and hopefully the minority among us, can be cruel and in fact evil. Those moments offered up names on the altar of history. The names of those who were killed that night, the names of the hundreds and hundreds who were wounded, the name of the sick and twisted that caused so much grief and destruction in our beautiful glittering valley, and the names of our servants and our soldiers, our heroes. Our first responders who responded first. And then after their first response, responded a second and a third time and kept going back to the Las Vegas Strip, to the place of all of that grief and trauma and difficulty over and over again for what was, history will tell, Las Vegas's longest night ever. Everybody was a servant that night, and my service was as a journalist. I was one of the rare few who was able to go on television and tell people from east to west, north to south, all over the globe what was happening in real time, unscripted. Our coverage streaming live on MSNBC and CNN throughout that very, very long night. My name is Reed Cowan, and normally I do anchor in Las Vegas Monday through Friday. I don't normally anchor on the weekend, but that weekend was unique, and they needed all hands on deck in media as well. I got a call in the 10 o'clock hour from my boss, Mark Neerman. Mark never said what happened, but I could hear the trauma in his own voice when he said, "Get here as soon as you can. It's going to be a very long night. This is major." And I said to him, "I'll be there in 2 minutes." Well, I ran to the closet to get dressed, to put clothes on, and as I did, I picked up my cell phone, and already through my station email came the videos that you all saw on television, national television. The first video I saw, I'll never forget. It was somebody's daughter. She didn't have a name, but when I look at these young people, I think, that's somebody's somebody. That's somebody's daughter. And there she was on video in my email, in my home, where my kids were sleeping not many feet away, saying, "They're shooting at us." And then more emails came in as I got dressed, just in rapid succession. More people crying and screaming and running. All of it playing against that backdrop of that cruel repeat gunfire that we've all heard on the news. And the backdrop of those sounds, I could also hear people running for their lives and praying. And we knew it was a big deal. We knew it was what so many had trained for and hoped would never happen. I remember in that moment, I ordered my spouse to take our 3 children into one bedroom. I said, "I don't know what's happened here, but keep the television on, keep your cell phone on. I can hear what sounds like machine guns down on the Las Vegas Strip. Don't answer the door, and I'll be in touch as soon as I can." You know, I live up on the west bench of the Las Vegas Valley, and so we're above the Strip. And normally it takes me about 30 minutes to get to work, but that night I went very, very fast. The Las Vegas Strip is sort of the bottom of that valley. It's that street that cuts through the middle of our valley. Henderson's on one side, Summerlin's on the other to the west. And as I drove down the freeway, I was going fast, but I noticed ambulances, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 past me, headed down towards the Las Vegas Strip. I turned on Sirius satellite radio, where I was able to pull up MSNBC. They were already streaming our live coverage. I could hear my peers among the running and among those who were wounded telling the story as it was happening in real time. At one point, I even heard one of my peers crouch down behind a cement barrier just in the shadow of Mandalay Bay, right underneath the shooter's window. And you know, these days, people can listen to police scanners and ambulance traffic on the internet. So I was able to listen to that also as I drove. And at that point, there were reports of more than one shooter in the valley, more than one shooter on the Las Vegas Strip, more than one property that had an active shooter. Keep in mind, the tragedy happened on the south end of the Strip. My TV station is north of the north end of the Strip, kind of in that old Fremont area. You know where it is. And so as I exited the freeway, having heard all of these reports from police and firefighters over the scanners, I thought, my God, am I going to take a bullet? Because I could see police staffing the far north end of the boulevard. Within minutes, I was on television. I remember I looked down and thought, I just put on flip-flops and I'm on television. Thank goodness they stayed with just my voice underneath the video, because throughout that very long night, we had interview after interview, expert after expert, call-in after call-in, viewer video after viewer video, and frankly, it was one of the most agonizing nights of my career. But we were also able to tell the stories of heroism. We were also able to tell people and quote that amazing saying from Mr. Rogers, when bad things happen, look for the helpers. How humbled I am to be in a room full of helpers. I will always place my hand over the heart and salute you anywhere I am. And so I'm thankful to share a little bit of my story today with this panel, so that perhaps we can celebrate what went right in Las Vegas, and so much went right on that night and in the nights and days that followed. So much was right. And perhaps unearth ways that we can all better work together in the media and our community of first responders. So to that end, we have a panel of amazing people who are here from my home valley of Las Vegas. We will be led in a panel discussion by Honora Lean, and we appreciate her as well. So Honora, a big round of applause for you.
Well, thank you, Reed, for it's powerful every time we hear a retelling of this story, and we're glad to have you here. I also want to take a minute to introduce your other two panelists today, Todd Nicholson, who is one of the two senior public health preparedness planners at the Southern Nevada Health District. In your capacity, you help develop the plans and do a lot of the coordination from a hospital and healthcare preparedness standpoint.
I do.
Retired military veteran, thank you for more than 30 years of service in the military. And we're also joined by Glenn Simpson. Glenn is the Special Events Manager for Las Vegas's Community Ambulance, overseeing the planning and response for special events. You've been in the pre-hospital community for many years with a number of organizations and have a lot of experience with mass gathering and mass event response. I'll let you both talk a little bit more about your organizations, but I just want to acknowledge, as you queued up this morning, it's such a powerful event. Whether we were there in person or whether we were watching from afar, there's no way that we weren't all in some way touched by this. And I want to acknowledge it's just been a few months. We're really not even 2 months out for that. And so our conversation today is personal. I know it's personal for many of you in the room. It's personal for all of you. Thank you for sharing your stories. We're going to look at what we can say about what worked well, as you articulated it. What story can we tell at this point? But I want to acknowledge there's a lot still being assessed, still being analyzed, a lot of reviews still happening. And so certainly the lessons and the stories that we'll continue to tell will happen for many weeks and many months and many years after we start the conversation today. I'm going to start with you, Todd. Can you just, we're a coalition of folks, or a conference of folks that participate in coalitions. Can you set the stage for us just so we understand a little bit more about what your coalition is? And kind of how you were preparing in readiness for something like this.
Absolutely. So in Las Vegas, we have more of an advisory coalition. We're not a response coalition in the traditional sense of the word. We're made up of acute care hospitals. There's 18 in the valley, 2 which are federal. We have 2 federally recognized tribes we are working with to bring them into the coalition. But also in our coalition, we have like the Clark County School District. We have over 400,000 children in our school district. We have 220 nurses that make up a core of people that we can bring into. We have NV Energy, so we're working with the NV Energy department, make sure that people that need the emergency powers during disasters are part of that. We also have the FBI, NOAA, and a lot of different organizations. They're not traditional healthcare, but they are important to what we do in a response mode. And then we also have the jurisdictions that are surrounding Las Vegas. So in Las Vegas, we have 3 major jurisdictions. We have Las Vegas, we have Clark County, we have North Las Vegas, and we have Henderson. So in a multi-jurisdictional area that is within the Las Vegas Valley, we have a lot of people that came together in a non-response mode, but stepped up if they were not part of the actual incident. So during one of our operational periods, the team from Henderson Office of Emergency Management took a shift in Clark County. The people from North Las Vegas came down and did the same thing. So that's kind of the makeup of the coalition in Las Vegas.
A lot of different partners at the table. Well, let's step back to the event. Reed, you got us started with a reminder of how some of those events unfolded. GLAAD, I want to ask you, tell us a little bit about what your organizational role was and start to help us understand how the event played out beginning there at the scene.
So on that particular night, Community Ambulance had been contracted to provide medical services for the Route 91 Harvest Festival. It's not the first year we've done it. We have extensive experience in our city providing medical to mass gathering events, including Electric Daisy Carnival. It's a small little carnival, 150,000 people a night, that we developed a medical plan for. We built a hospital on site. We have physicians, nurses. It takes all of our community partners to do that. So a 25,000 person concert, no big deal. And that weekend was no different than any other weekend that we would have experienced. That Sunday night, Jason Aldean had come on the stage. We had 16 on-duty personnel there that night, including myself. I was managing the event. I had a supervisor under me who was kind of managing our medical tent. We had a medical tent on site. It was a 20-foot by 20-foot medical tent with some beds, 3-4 beds. And then we had our personnel stationed throughout. We had crews stage right. We'd crews in areas that the public knew we were there. Very important for our organization that people aren't activating 911. As you can imagine, Las Vegas is probably one of the busiest 911 systems. And our goal, outside of being a 911 provider, is that we provide that coverage and limit the impact that it could have on our system. Jason Aldean had gone on that night. I was standing stage right. And I'd gotten a call to come over to Gate 2A. Gate 2A, just to give you some quick geography, is located closest to Mandalay Bay on the Las Vegas Boulevard site. There's nowhere on site for cabs. It's literally a festival ground, about a 2-acre festival ground. We had a couple that probably had a little too much fun that day, and they were ready to go.
Vegas, don't laugh.
It's Vegas. Job security, and they were ready to go home. And so we got them a cab with the assistance from our fine folks at Las Vegas Metro Police Department. I'll refer to them as Metro a lot. We got them a cab, and we sent them on their way. Immediately, we walked back down the boulevard to go back into the venue. So I was walking now towards Mandalay Bay. At that time, we heard what we now know were the first 3 shots. I knew there was no pyrotechnics. It's important for our organization. We don't just get a call and say, hey, we got this concert, we need 16 of you. There's pre-planning that goes into it. And so the pre-planning, we knew there was no pyrotechnics. And so when I heard those first 3 shots, my immediate thought was, outdoor festival, the speakers, they're crackling, not working, something's going on, no big deal. I had woken up with a head cold that morning. It's probably my ears making noise. And then we heard that first volley. When we heard that first volley, that was when we saw some of those Metro officers grab their weapons and draw their weapons. We knew they were coming from Mandalay Bay. We didn't know they were coming from above Mandalay Bay. At that point, I ducked behind what was a 3-foot wall. The officers began proceeding forward towards Mandalay Bay, and I don't know in that moment why, but I made the decision to run back into the venue. In EMS, there's two things you learn, and it's your safety and your partner's safety. Those were 15 of my coworkers that I was responsible for that night, and I needed to know that they were okay. I also needed to get resources there, and so that was immediately what I did after I dove behind a bar, landing on top of a lot of people, asking me what was happening, and I had to look these people in the face and say, I have no idea what's happening. And so I immediately summons more resource. We have that capability. We work on the same radio system as our fire department, which is very imperative in a situation like this, and began requesting more resources.
Tell us, Todd, from a community perspective, when were you guys notified? How did that notification happen, and what did you start to understand was unfolding?
So about 10:35, the Clark County Multi-Agency Coordination Center had activated, and we're on their PBX system. So they sent out a mass notification. We received text, we received emails that we were being activated in the Medical Surge Area Command. Now the theory behind the Medical Surge Area Command is we come in, we help to coordinate the decompression of the hospitals so they can absorb the surge. And so as we walked in, we started to do that. But what we learned from this event was a lot of the people that were in the ERs that were there, you know, they'd had the 3-day cold and they were just now getting around to see a physician on a Sunday night thinking there wouldn't be anybody in the ER in Vegas. Those people, they decompressed themselves. They sought care at some of our acute care facilities. We have 4 micro hospitals in the local area, so they left. And basically the hospitals decompressed themselves. But how the Medical Surge Area Command comes into play is we're a mobile support unit. It's made up of people from public health, where I work, in the Office of Public Health Preparedness at the Health District. And it's actually coordinated by one of the hospitals. And then the members of the Medical Surge Area Command are hospital members. So they are directly connected into their hospitals and their organizations, so we can call in and get information like bed statuses, patient statuses, and things like that. So as we started the first operational period, there were about 8 people in the Medical Surge Area Command sitting side by side with the Multi-Agency Coordination Center, which included the SF8 desk.
Okay. Let's talk a little, all of us in the room, I think, have been involved in some kind of mass casualty planning in our communities. Can you talk a little bit, both Todd and Glenn, about distribution of patients, right? This was a scale that most communities have never seen. We all have our models for mass casualty response. Can you talk a little bit from the scene to the hospitals about was there a planned distribution? Did it go as the community has planned, or is this really something totally new in terms of how patients got to the hospitals and which hospitals received patients?
Oh, I think from the pre-planning side, when we plot these venues and we plot these events based on the type of event, we try to set out for what's going to be our collection points. It's not a term that you really want to talk about publicly, but we need to know where our ingress and our egress is going to be for our ambulances. I need staging areas. I can never predict where staging units is going to be based on where the incident is going to occur. And that night, our collection points, our staging areas would not work. Somebody's shooting from the 32nd floor. There is no safe area for me to put ambulances except further down the Las Vegas Strip. And so our resources were not close by. What we saw was, in the event of an MCI, we use that color coding system, right? So black, we know they're deceased, and red, yellow, and green. So it was imperative that we got that self-evacuation out. You may hear reports that there weren't enough emergency exits. A couple things I'll say to that is we pulled people off of the fence that were climbing the fence when if they would have just walked 2 more feet, literally 2 more feet, the gate was wide open. But they were having fun that day. And so we had to, obviously it was a sense of panic, but I can't discount the fact, and I'll say it over and over again, 21,500 people self-evacuated from this venue. That's unheard of. And we did that with the help of ushers, et cetera, et cetera. We began setting up triage on the street. Obviously, we were unprotected at this point. At one point, in an incident like this, you think of secondary device. Where's the secondary device? Well, of course, it's going to be at the medical tent because that's where people are going for help. At one point, we lost power to our tent. We've learned in some after actions that somebody cut the power to that tent because they didn't want the shooter to see where we were at. So now we had to evacuate the tent. So in the midst of this, we're evacuating the tent. Now we're out in the open on the street, and it was a constant just re-triaging patients and moving patients from those kind of areas. We often talk about triage tags, and we've all gone to school and we've all joked with the triage tags. That wasn't an option that night. It just didn't make sense because stuff was changing rapidly. Then, I can't discount the fact that the hundreds of, in my book, heroes that decided to take their own vehicles, pull them from the parking lots, pull up and say, load them up. I had people crying, driving, looking at me, because a lot of these people were not from Las Vegas, saying, where's the closest hospital? And, we were kind of trying to do our self-distribution. One of our hospitals that took the most impact was a small community hospital, not a trauma center, a small community hospital. And they never turned us away. They just said, they were receptive, they were out there, they were receiving patients, and we just kept bringing patients to them. So we sent a lot of people off in private vehicles. At one point, I looked to my left, and they had a critical patient on one of our gurneys, and they were loading it up into the back of a pickup truck. I was like, no. We're not putting gurneys in the back of pickup trucks and going down, right? That's PR nightmare, right? Like, we're not doing that. Not gonna do
We
that.
would have understood.
Okay, good.
You had good sense in that.
And so even in these moments, we had to, you still had to think straight, and we still had to keep things going. We had 2 ambulances on site as part of our medical plan, and within those first 20 minutes, we had taken the gurneys out, and one of my ambulances, I had 5 off-duty personnel that were attending the concert that walked over, and in that moment became clocked-in employees. And one of them pulled up with the ambulance, and he had 9 people in the back and asked me permission, can I go to the hospital? I'm like, go, get out of here. And so we had 9, ambulances are not made for 9 people in the back. Maybe 3, maybe 4, but not 9. And so we immediately began sending patients to the hospital. We kind of began distributing them in our best sense. One of the things we've learned in the after action is that the smart people typed in hospital, and they went to the bottom of the list and found the hospital that was the furthest away and drove to that hospital. And so we saw a lot of that. But the public that night, we couldn't have got the job done by ourselves. It was the public that moved these people, got them to the hospital. At one point, we had gotten reports that an officer had been down. Those are my people. And so when I get a call that an officer's down, things change in that instant. And it's not to discount that other people's lives were not important at that very moment, but my supervisor decided to take one of our employees that night. He grabbed 2 Metro officers with their rifles, and they decided, unprotected, to go into the venue as shots were still being fired just to seek out this officer. Unfortunately, that officer passed away. We had a funeral to celebrate his life. But that night, the public stepped up and moved people to hospitals and got them that care that they needed.
And I think it punctuates that the public watches what all of you do. They see the example you set and the tone you set in our communities. And I believe that the public stepped up not only because there were so many good people, but because they were able to see through their own lives and the years of their lives what all of you do, which is another facet to the diamond, I think.
If I can touch on something. That night, EMS, our traditional EMS, our AMR, Medic West, community, ambulance services, did 180 runs. And that's not to say there was only 180 people evacuated. I know for a fact one ambulance did actually take 6 people to the hospital. But like Glenn said, the majority of them went into Google Map and said, what's the closest hospital? Well, the 2 closest hospitals to the venue, one is not a trauma center, one's a level 2 trauma center. The level 1 trauma center is about 6 miles away. That's why these smaller hospitals in Las Vegas received a lot of the patients, 50, 60 patients. Our level 2 trauma center received quite a bit more than that, and they all stepped up very well. But they were down to calling in their ICU nurses that weren't busy, their med-surg nurses that weren't busy, that have never dealt with a trauma in their life. And they walked around the corner, and there's this massive humanity, this massive blood on the floor, and they were like, it's not what I signed up for. And yet they had to perform. But the other community partners that were at the table, the Veterans Affairs, I mean, wow, what a great asset that is in Las Vegas. We heard about, how do we pull those in? Well, they sit at the table at our coalition. They sent 2 people the next day down to our hospitals to do critical stress debriefs out of their social work section, and a trauma certified nurse that went out there and did these critical stress debriefs. We had a limited number of psychological first responders, and we wanted to centralize them, but the VA had mobile vet units that are basically a 4-person bus that we could then collaborate with them and ask them to move them into different locations like the MGM or near the Excalibur, the New York, so those employees that were suffering the same thing then could reach out and get that help. So by having those community partners at our coalition, while I said we're not a response coalition, we're more of an advisory, by being able to reach out, touch those guys, because I sit in all of their emergency management committee meetings, I know what their assets are, by being able to reach out and touch them and have them respond to the Medical Surge Area Command, we pulled in a lot of big dividends just by having that coalition set up in Las Vegas.
And anchoring the news that night from the 10 o'clock hour to 4:30 a.m., we were shocked on set at how quickly we saw groups like that getting people over to the Thomas and Mack, which is a huge venue on the campus of UNLV, and people moving off of the Strip. And that actually had another purpose, which was Metro Police was able to get all of the people who had witnessed this and quickly take their witness statements while it was fresh on their minds because of these community partnerships. So not only the people that were wounded were moved and the people who had passed away, but also the people who needed to give statements for their investigation and reunite with their family members, all because of those partnerships.
Yeah. So, Todd, let me ask you again. You highlighted some of the ways in which you as coalition partners touched each other to find out what resources were available. You touched a little bit on some of the mental health. In this question and this idea of family reunification, can you talk a little bit about was there patient tracking? How did you guys segue into that part of the response?
Well, patient tracking is an interesting thing. I spent...
Well said. Yes.
You're speaking their language.
Ask me how many charts were generated that night by EMS providers.
I will tell you, I spent a lot of years in the Army doing medical exercises because that's what I did. I was a medical plans and ops guy. And I had a finite list of names with people's names on it that I knew once I had these 20, 25 people in, the exercise could then end. And there's always the 1 or 2 that never quite made it. They were either down in the dining facility, the 7-Eleven, out having a smoke break, at the smoking shed, of course, that was union approved. And I could never, ever quite get 100%. That night, the Medical Surge Area Command and the teams that were there just reached out to the hospitals, and they worked collaboratively with either the emergency manager, the house supervisor, the ER directors, and we started collecting names. Now, folks, it didn't go, like you see on TV, oh yeah, we've got Joe Smith and John Smith and Ted Smith. No, the names came in and you go, is that a real name? I mean, is that really Kit Kat? Is that really a name? Snickers bar? And you go, wonder what that's all about. And there's so much confusion because, if you have children like I do, I have 1 or 2 or 7, and you happen to name them Junior, but he goes by the middle name. So my son would be Wayne and I would be Todd. And then you go to the hospital and both of you are there because you're either wounded or you're dying. The confusion about the name without that suffix, that junior or that senior, really causes a lot of havoc. And we didn't ferret that out for probably 5 or 6 days after the event. So I'm here to tell you the 568 bodies that we were tracking, the hospitals just coordinated with us and they did a great job of giving us names and cleaning it up. And my hat's off to them. We provided a lot of the information, the numbers, not the names, over to the sheriff, who then had his press conference and he could update. I know the sheriff took a lot of grief because the numbers kind of changed, but we in healthcare, we know numbers change. Today they're in the hospital, tomorrow they're discharged, or they have passed away. So as we cleaned that up for 26 days, all I did was reach out to the hospitals and get a daily update my charts, and then do another table over for the sheriff. And I still see the names. And it wasn't until the 31st of October that we finally could reconcile the last person I was carrying as a Jane Doe. And we did that through our vital records who handled death certificates in Southern Nevada. So it's a big job.
Reed, from your perspective, as you were having to sort of be the community's eyes and ears on what was unfolding, we know in kind of mass casualty situations, there's discrepancy, how many people, what are the names, families are looking for their loved ones. What was your media purview on how that was unfolding, and kind of where did you see your role, if any, and how did you coordinate with the community's response in that regard?
Well, our window to the world first came from the viewers who were emailing us the videos. You know, everybody's got a smartphone nowadays, and everybody knows how to get it to the media quickly. And so that was sort of the first window that we had. Then the second window came from sourcing. We had police partners who would send us text messages and tips. We had what was going on. And then it was the news conferences. And, you know, we on the set felt no agitation and at one point the sheriff during one of his news conferences said, I'm not going to give you numbers. And we knew that that was okay because we knew that there was work to be done. And so that allowed us to go to different sectors of our own work. When the numbers finally came out, we were able to sort of land it and say, okay, this has happened. And I remember doing a quick search for mass casualty events in the United States, mass shooting statistics, and I was the first one to say on the air, this is the largest mass shooting in modern U.S. history. And so being able to have those numbers was very helpful, but we knew that there was work to be done and that there was more important work than counting, and we also knew that the numbers would change. Absolutely. And that it was a part of it.
It's incredible. We'll get to the audience questions in just a few minutes, but we've only scratched the surface, I know, of what your response was, what the experience has been. But I'd like to ask, starting with you, Todd, what do you think, from a preparedness perspective, what was the kind of number one investment you think that you made that kind of paid off, whether it was training, exercise, planning?
I think it's a combination. It's a combination of all three of those. I've been there for 2.5 years. The first thing I stepped into when I first got there is we did a public health outbreak of tularemia. Public health is in the lead. And you have to stand up your ICS or your doc, and you have to run through all those. You have to coordinate with those partners in the FBI. And then the next drill we did was a major earthquake where we involved not only the Nevada National Guard, we also involved the California National Guard, and it was a NORTHCOM DOD-driven exercise. But you have to be there and you have to participate. Training and having a plan that you can start with, it pays big dividends in getting to know the people on the other end of the phone, because Napoleon said a plan is only good up till first contact. And after that, it's out the window and you fly by your seat. But if you don't have the plan, you're going to fail. And I think by having every partner at the table, and I kind of missed talking about it, we also have Aries Races as part of our coalition, and we do a lot of drills where they'll go out and set up at hospitals, and they will do emergency communications across the spectrum and teaching them that stuff.
So those are the ham radio.
The ham radio guys, right? Amateur radio evacuation system, but those guys,
And gals, it looks like.
those guys are rock stars in my view. We just had a presentation at our coalition from one of the Aries Races guys that just got back from being down supporting the efforts in Puerto Rico. So having those community partners and working and exercising with them and going out and being part of their meetings so they know who you are really pays dividends in our response in Las Vegas.
Glenn, what do you think?
I'll take it one step further. Those are important, and for me, I'll sum it up with one word, and it's relationships. I work for a private agency. I don't work for a public agency. My funding's not the same. It's different. But it's important that all of us in this room are reaching out to our private and our public partners, and that our public partners trust our private partners. It's promoters, these venues, these people that are putting on these large gatherings, they have to trust your organization. One of the first phone calls to the fire chief, the EMS fire chief, came from us. It didn't come from notification through the 911 center, it came from us. And Chief Clausen could have slept through it, not answered, or not believed what we said, but there's a trust that exists. Yeah. And when I call for help, I need help. I'm not just calling for help because I have 10 patients over there. So it's imperative that all of us in this room are opening those conversations. I'll be the first to admit that drills are rough. When you're on the ambulance side of these drills, we're the transport group. So I get those 10 names of Snickers and Kit Kat, and I take them to the hospital, and then I turn around and I do it again. But that night, my role, EMS's role, was involved in your hospitals. I had to take patients out of there and move them to trauma centers. My ambulances, my personnel had to move people from the scene. My people had to respond into the scene. And when I say my people, I'm talking about all the agencies that pulled together that night. It didn't matter what uniform we wore. It didn't matter what ambulance I drove. I had too many personnel, not enough ambulances, that we made a call to AMR, a very large ambulance provider, and said, we have people, do you have ambulances? Their response, I have ambulances, I don't have people. And now people that are employed by us and we're competitors are driving AMR ambulances to just get vehicles on the road. So relationships are key. Those don't happen overnight. They don't happen through an exercise. I've been doing this since 2004. I know it looks like I'm out of high school, but I've been doing this since 2004.
I'm closer. He actually could use a shave. I can see.
Never shaved in my entire life.
Some whiskers.
But relationships are key, and even with our media partners, relationships are key. I want the media to come to me and get the story. I don't want the media getting the story from somebody else. So I think relationships, I can't stress it enough, are important.
Well, I think that's a message. This is a perfect audience for us to reinforce that message. Let me start by saying thank you for this conversation. We're going to turn it over. We've got about 10 minutes to do some audience questions, and I apologize, I can't see where that might be. These lights are a little blinding. But do we have any questions from the room?
No questions, good.
All right.
Come on, really? I see one in the back. Where are we? I'll just ask you to start speaking because I can't actually see where you are. Okay, thanks, Molly. Go ahead in the back.
Run in the mic. First, is it on? Turn the mic. It's on. Okay. First, just thank you for coming and sharing with us. And mine is more comment than question. I was incredibly impressed watching I'm from Kansas, in the PIO, the sheriff's officer that kept doing the news briefings. And you could tell from being on the outside of the area that this is happening, but in preparedness, that the relationships were there. And that's impressive coming off of TV. To see that, to have things accepted, like you said, that you knew you weren't going to get numbers, him being able to say, I'm not going to give you numbers because we don't have accurate numbers. And so I just really commend you. I always watch with interest in any event how the media PIO stuff goes. And good job. Really good job.
And that praise is well deserved. You know, I like I say, I was on the set from 10:30 p.m., 10:30ish p.m. till 4:30 a.m. and the sheriff gave 3, maybe even 4 news briefings out there from the scene. And every time we were keenly aware that somebody within Metropolitan Police was watching all of the information we were disseminating, because he was able to clean it up, just like you were cleaning up numbers and names and patient lists. It's the very same thing on our side of it. And he went into those news conferences not only informed from his people down there on the battle lines, as it were, but also people who watched us. And they were able to clean up and button up some things. And so that praise is very, very well deserved. And we'll take it back to our media partners at Metro for sure.
Honora, we have one from Christy over here.
Hi, Christy Koenig, County of San Diego EMS. Thank you for sharing your story. I'm wondering if
whether it was a gunshot wound, where the gunshot wound was, were they trample injuries? Because, you know, most of those people that were in the hospital are seen were trample injuries by people trying to get out of the way. We had one gentleman that ended up at one of our micro hospitals probably 15 miles away from the event that had to be sent back to a level 1 trauma center because it was found he had a subdural hematoma. So we are underway to get the severity and looking at that, but we're less than 2 months out, so that process is going to take a bit. And we're really never going to know the full impact of this because every life has lives attached to it that were affected by this tragedy, and it's far-reaching. So, but we are working on that.
And every ambulance that night, the moment people saw an ambulance, they helped themselves into the ambulance. So whether they were critical enough, not critical enough, I'm going with my mom, I'm going with my dad, and so we were just piling people in. So even though I needed to go to, maybe I could have taken this group to a smaller hospital, they could have had somebody in the back that was critically wounded. So we didn't have a choice at that moment.
there's actually an impressive video from Israel showing them throwing a bleeding person out of the back of the ambulance. That didn't make for very good news reporting to the public, but that person was less severely injured than the people they needed to put into that ambulance.
We didn't
so
throw
it's
anybody,
a challenge.
We didn't throw anybody out, but I will tell you that we did have somebody, a bystander, threaten one of our paramedics who actually had been shot in the leg, and he's doing well. He was there, kept working through it, even though he was shot in the leg, didn't tell anyone.
I want to get his number.
Yeah.
That's the story.
He.
I mean, we like hero stories,
It's a good,
right?
great story.
Yeah.
No, it's a good story. And Jimmy's his name. And Jimmy, the bystander had looked Jimmy in the face and said, "You'll start doing CPR on this person within the next 3 seconds, or I'm going to choke you out." And he counted down, 3, 2, 1, and he began choking Jimmy. At that point, our friends at Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department saw that that gentleman was no longer in the first aid tent. But those are scenarios that we had to work through. You know, people, they just wanted help, you know, and everybody wanted to help. And to tell people, no, I'm not doing CPR, I never want to repeat those words in my entire life, because I didn't sign up to not do CPR. It's tiring, but I didn't sign up not to do CPR.
I think we've got 2 more questions. I'm going to go to this side of the room.
Hi, I'm Jackie. I'm from Fort Lauderdale, Florida. We had an active shooter incident, if you can recall, on the news with the Fort Lauderdale airport at the baggage claim. So we, of course, have had a lot of lessons learned, a lot of facilities that took patients and stuff like that. What I really would like to know, are you willing to share your active action report, because to compare ours to yours to see what we can learn from your incident, knowing, you know, here in not here in South Florida, way over there, kind of cold here, in South Florida.
We're in South Florida?
No, I'm in South Florida, but you're more than welcome to come visit us. But where we are in South Florida, you know, we have the cruise ships, we have a lot of venues and stuff like that we can actually look at, unfortunately, active shooters and stuff like that. So I just wanted to know if you're willing to share your after action report with the coalition, so we may be able to learn from your issues, concerns.
I happen to know exactly where that is. I have a son that lives in Pembroke Pines. So that
Over by Miramar.
That and the hurricane, when his mom wasn't going to evacuate him, let me tell you, I was very livid, I guess is a good word. But I think once the coalition and once the community has completed all of the processes with the AAR, I think the only way we learn is by sharing. It's nothing we can keep to ourselves, because we all need to learn to get better. This was one of those lone wolf things that you just don't see coming, because he doesn't tell anybody. And while we have the Fusion Center in Southern Nevada right there, this guy worked alone. So there was no indicators, there was no intelligence, there was no human, there was nothing that we could gather. So by sharing what our lessons learned in our AAR is the only way we're all going to get better, so I don't see a reason we wouldn't.
And you can be very proud of not only South Florida. I'm a former WSVNer, if you watch 7 News there. Belkis and Craig, chow chow. You know what that is. You can be proud of the state of Florida, because now that our leaders are trying to figure out how to disseminate some of the $15 million that's been raised for victims, Orlando has been very helpful and instructive on how they decided to distribute all of the money to the victims and their families. So you can be very proud that already from that perspective, the Florida experience has benefited the Nevada experience.
Oh, definitely. We had calls from both Boston and Orlando immediately after the shooting, offering lessons learned and what they could do for family resiliency centers and reunification, and as Reed mentioned, the money piece, and the communities around Las Vegas were very supportive, so it was overwhelming.
We're going to take one last question there in the back.
Hello, my name is Domingo from Long Beach Memorial Medical Center. I was also in the military, so thank you for your service, sir. And thank you for the panel for sharing their experience. My question is with training, as you know how important it is. Air assets. I didn't hear anything with air assets. Were they available that day? And if so, have you implemented them in training now?
We used some air assets during Vigilant Guard. Again, it was a local or a statewide earthquake drill and then a mass migration from Southern California into Nevada for the second half of the week. And we started using the air assets from the National Guard, the new smaller litter-carrying helicopters. For this event, because of the location on the Strip, we didn't use air assets. They probably were available, but they weren't reached out to because this all kind of settled down over about a period of an hour.
Got it.
Moving people out.
Nevada's got a great one, Dust Off. I know we were with them in Afghanistan, and they're out of Nevada, National Guard.
Yeah, I was an XO for a medevac battalion, so I appreciate those guys more than you know.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks for the question. Well, we are, as we knew, our time would go very quickly. I think Todd has a wonderful embroidered subscription of the Vegas Strong on his sleeves. And I think you've certainly just helped us see a glimpse of how strong your community was, how successful in the grand scheme of things you were in response. I want to ask you all to join me in thanking Todd, Reed, and Glenn for sharing your stories, for your response. And for any of you in the room that were a part of that response as well, thank you every day for your service, but certainly thank you for your heroism and your service on that terrible night. Thank you.
Gannon. I am a mesh